Hi, everybody. Dr. Vardy here with a quick instructional mini lesson to walk you through two of the things that I'm asking for you guys to do this week. I want to talk to you briefly about color coding your Cornell notes and drafting a synthesis map of your sources. So you can see here I'm already in our Canvas view. And you will see that your project builder for this week is color-coded Cornell notes and a synthesis map draft. I'm just going to look at this assignment really quickly with you. Your task is to add 3 new sources to your working bibliography. So at this point, you should have any useful sources that you're pulling from Project 1. You should have your 3 sources, if they're all useful to you, from last week's project builder, and then you're going to add 3 more to it this week. Now, this week, you're going to do Cornell notes in exactly the same way as you did last week, but this week, I'm challenging you to color code. Now, the colors you choose and the code that you're using to organize your ideas is going to be unique to your research question or topic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in this video. You're going to draft a synthesis map, and there's a couple of different ways you can approach that depending on if you prefer a more visually dynamic or static approach. All of these things are going to help you prepare for your Project 2 presentation, which of course is a presentation of your secondary research in process. So I'm just going to show you really quick in our home page. If you scroll down to the bottom, there is a list of student samples. We talked about this at the beginning of the semester, but it's a refresh if you haven't seen it in a while. There are a couple examples here of color-coded notes from past students. And so you can click on these to kind of see how some students of mine in the past and other students who've taken 3010 have done their Cornell notes. So you can see that the color coding isn't universal, right? There are some points in each source that don't get a color code or they don't fall into a particular category. So that's okay. The whole purpose of this is to be able to organize the information that you're actually finding. There's no pressure to highlight information in any particular color, only as it is useful to you. So having said that, I want to talk to you about the synthesis map part of it, because I think having practiced the Cornell notes, you guys are pretty familiar with that setup. A synthesis map is basically a visualization of multiple different pieces of information. And it's been called many things. Some people would call it a concept map. Some people might call it a mind map. And truly, depending on what you're naming it, you might have different connotations for what you think it is or should be doing. There's also a term called a gigamap, which is useful for mapping processes and shows up a lot, especially if you're in the sciences or engineering fields. So when I say synthesis map, if you are wanting something a little more static, this is what is usually meant when we talk about a synthesis map of secondary sources. It usually looks like a grid. And what you're laying out on the grid, whether it's on the x-axis or the y-axis, you're laying out all your sources and their arguments and the points that they're making in relation to your research topic. So you can see here, this is just a sample. The research question for this sample synthesis map is, what role does capital punishment play in American society? So we could imagine that this is a research topic within a discourse community that's focused on the judicial system. It could be the discourse community of prosecuting attorneys, or it could be somebody who's in political science who's trying to advocate for different legislation. Now, Here, and this is not something that I've necessarily assigned for you to do, but there's possible answers, and these are not just plucked from the air. We would assume that the researcher is plotting out these possible answers based on what they've read in their sources. So what are the authors already saying? Now, if you plot on the y-axis here, your different sources, author A, author B, author C, then along the x-axis, you can plot the different points within the conversation. And you can sort of now start to compare and contrast what each author says about each point. So it's really, I think, a nifty way to lay out all of your sources, arguments. It forces you to summarize and really condense what are the key points and put authors in conversation with each other. Now, when I say conversation, if you've taken me for English 1020, that's a term that I use a lot, which is pulled from Kenneth Burke. And basically, it's talking about this very comparison. What are various scholars in any given field saying about the same topic? And because they're within the same discourse community, we can say that they are saying it to each other. Because when you're writing within a scholarly discourse community, your intended audience is fellow scholars in that discipline. So another way we could imagine this, so I showed you authors along the y-axis, points along the x-axis. This just kind of reverses it. You can see here, this would be more probably useful for a discipline in which most of the articles are in an MRAD structure: introduction, methods, results, analysis, discussion. The purpose of the study, type and population of we would assume human participants, but it could be a population of biological participants. Anything else related to the theme or overall sort of higher order concerns of the article. And then first main idea, second main idea, other main ideas. And then along that x-axis, you are comparing and contrasting all of the articles that you found. Now, both of these grids that I just showed you are really nice for comparing and contrasting sources. But if you are a little bit more visual, or if you like a little bit more of a dynamic map, you could think about some of these other examples here. One that I particularly like, I'll show you, is sort of mapping out in that sort of concept map or mind map format, but it's including color coding. These words are like too small for me to see, and probably for you too, but here's what I'm imagining, is that we have our main topic and then we have subtopics, right? So these could be, okay, all of these authors fall into the camp that agrees with the argument, and all of these yellow authors, they disagree, right? You could, again, make the color code to be whatever you want it to be. You could do a map that way. You could think about doing something more digital where you're making your circles, connecting them with different lines that would also contain information, right? So, okay, the green lines mean this person agrees with this person. The blue lines mean they disagree. These subpoints are different aspects of their argument, which might connect to other arguments, etc. So you can think about your synthesis map in like this, maybe a more, I would call it like free-form way, if you want to map it out in a more, I don't want to say organic, but that's the term that keeps coming to my mind. Or you can use the more static format of the compare and contrast across columns, using articles along your x-axis, themes and ideas along your y-axis, or vice versa. It's up to you. Either way, by the end of Project 5, you should have a solid start to a big picture of all of your sources.